The journey had stretched for hours, the roads winding through desolate stretches of desert, the dark sky above swallowing up any semblance of civilization. It was later than we'd planned, and the silence in the car had become suffocating, thicker than any conversation we might have had. The only sounds were the hum of the engine and the occasional flicker of the headlights illuminating the empty road. Neither of us spoke. There was something about tonight, something in the air that made words feel unnecessary. The tension between us was thick, yet neither of us wanted to turn back, not with so many miles behind us. Eventually, we pulled off the highway, desperate for a place to sleep. The small, run-down motel we stopped at seemed to have been stuck in time. The neon vacancy sign above flickered weakly in the cold night air, casting an eerie glow on the cracked asphalt. It was the kind of place you'd only stop at when there was nowhere else to go, but at this hour, it was the only choice we had. Inside, a bored young girl sat behind the front desk, chewing gum without a care in the world. She barely acknowledged us, her eyes dull as she asked in a monotone if we wanted one bed or two. I glanced at her, then at him. The air between us seemed heavy with something unsaid, a wordless hesitation that hung in the balance. I forced myself to speak, my voice a little too quick, too. She didn't even smile, just handed over the key with a cold, detached gesture. The room was exactly what we expected: small, dark, and cramped. The air was thick with the scent of bleach and stale coffee, a strange combination that made me instantly uneasy. I tossed my duffel bag onto the farthest bed, trying to create some distance between myself and her, though I could feel her presence lurking just behind me. She stripped off her jacket in silence, her movements slow, deliberate, as if each motion carried an invisible weight. I tried not to meet her gaze. There was an odd tension in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. We lay in the darkness, each of us staring at the ceiling, the silence stretching between us like a heavy, invisible barrier. The room felt too small, too confined. My mind raced, trying to make sense of everything: of us, of the situation, of the strange, gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. But I couldn't bring myself to say anything. I couldn't explain why I felt this way, not even to myself. After what felt like an eternity, her voice broke the silence. She told me she was going to take a shower. I nodded, relieved. The absence of conversation felt like a weight on my chest, and I was glad for the brief reprieve. But as soon as she left, I felt a strange emptiness settle in the room. The silence felt wrong, heavy. It wasn't peaceful, it was oppressive, pressing against me, closing in. I turned over in bed, my eyes drawn to the closed bathroom door. I could hear the shower running, but something about the sound wasn't right. It was muffled, distant, like the water was coming from a faraway place, not from the room just a few feet away. Then, I heard it. Whispers. Faint, hushed voices, too quiet to understand, yet impossible to ignore. I froze. They were coming from nowhere, from everywhere, as if the very walls themselves were whispering secrets. I sat up, straining to hear. The sound seemed to move, to shift, like the voices were drifting around the room. I stood up, heart racing, and looked toward the bathroom. Everything seemed normal. The door was still closed, the light still on. I knocked softly. No answer. The whispers stopped the moment my hand touched the door handle. I paused, my hand trembling, then slowly twisted the knob. But the door didn't open. I stood there for a long moment, listening to the silence that followed, my pulse quickening in my ears. I knocked again. Still nothing. But as soon as I touched the handle a second time, the water in the shower resumed. The sound was unnaturally loud now, as if the faucet had been turned all the way up. I turned away, trying to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the room. Hours passed, but the unsettling feeling didn't leave. I lay awake in the dark, my mind racing, my eyes wide open, staring into the shadows of the room. I tried to ignore the odd sounds, the faint creaks of the building settling, but then the whispers returned. Only this time, they were louder, clearer, angrier. The voices were sharp and frantic, speaking in a language I couldn't understand, yet their tone was unmistakable. They were fighting. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest, as the sounds grew more frantic, more desperate. The voices seemed to be coming from all around us now, filling the room with their violent energy. Male and female voices, both shouting at each other. I couldn't make out the words, but the fury in their tones was undeniable. I flicked on the light, half expecting to find someone standing in the room with us, but the space was empty. She didn't stir. Her form was still, her eyes closed in a deep, dreamless sleep, or so it seemed. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I turned the light off. The moment the darkness returned, the voices resumed. This time, they were clearer, as if they were standing just behind me, shouting directly into my ear. I reached for her, shaking her awake. She stirred slightly, but her eyes remained closed. I wanted to scream, to demand she wake up, but I couldn't. The room felt as if it were closing in on me, the shadows twisting, the air growing thick with something dark, something that didn't belong. At 3 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I stumbled out of bed, my legs weak beneath me as I moved toward the door. The cold night air hit me like a slap in the face, and I stepped outside, desperate for a break from the suffocating tension inside. The desert stretched out before me, empty and silent, but even in the vastness of the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching. I looked back toward the motel room. The light inside was on. I hadn't left it on. I was sure of that. A figure stood in front of the window, motionless. It was a silhouette, just a shadow against the faint glow of the room, but there was something about the way it stood that made my blood run cold. It wasn't human, at least not in the way I understood humans. I stepped closer, my heart thudding in my chest. But as I approached the door, a wave of unease washed over me, and I hesitated. Something was wrong. I didn't want to go back in there. But I couldn't stay out here forever. I turned and walked back into the room. As soon as I stepped inside, the air shifted. It felt thicker, colder, more oppressive. I glanced toward the bed, but it was empty. Her side of the bed was untouched, the covers still perfectly in place. Then I saw it. The mirror on the wall. The shadows inside the glass were moving, flickering in unnatural patterns, shifting shapes that didn't belong. The reflection of the room wasn't right. It seemed to mock us, showing things that weren't there. The flickering figures in the mirror moved violently, as if struggling to break free. I turned around quickly, my heart racing. But the room was still empty, silent. She was gone. I turned back to the mirror. The shapes inside had changed, their movements more frantic now, as if they were desperately trying to escape the confines of the glass. The air grew colder, and my breath became visible in the freezing chill that had suddenly filled the room. I felt a presence behind me, something dark and heavy, but when I turned, no one was there. When I looked back at the bed, she was lying there, her eyes wide open, unblinking. Her body was still, as though frozen in place. I felt a chill run through me, a deep, gut-wrenching fear that I couldn't explain. "Did you go outside?" I whispered, my voice barely a breath. She didn't answer immediately. Her lips parted slightly, and then, in a voice I didn't recognize, she said, "I saw us." The words hit me like a punch. I could feel it now. Whatever had been in this room, whatever had attached itself to us, was still here. It was in the shadows, in the mirror, in her eyes. I knew we had to leave. Without a word, we packed what little we had and left before dawn. The sky was still dark, the world holding its breath, and as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had left a part of ourselves behind. Something had followed us, and it wasn't going to let go that easily. The silence in the car was no longer uncomfortable. It was just empty. Zach and I had been driving for what felt like days. The snowstorm hit out of nowhere, each gust of wind piling the snow higher, blurring the road until it was hard to distinguish between where the pavement ended and the snow began. The headlights were useless in the heavy snowfall, and the windshield wipers struggled against the onslaught of white, but we kept driving, even though we were both exhausted. We needed a place to stay. After what felt like hours of driving through the barren, snow-covered stretch of rural Utah, we saw the faint glow of a neon vacancy sign. It flickered weakly in the storm's relentless embrace. A solitary motel stood at the side of the road, its weathered and crumbling exterior blending with the vast emptiness around it. The faded sign seemed almost apologetic, like it didn't really care whether we stopped or not, as though it had long ago given up on being anything more than a transient space for the lost and tired. I pulled into the parking lot, which was more ice than concrete, and parked under the flickering neon light. The old building seemed to groan with each gust of wind, its windows too dark to see inside. The silence of the place felt almost oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't welcome here. The door to the office opened before I could even knock. A woman stood behind the counter, her eyes dark and unreadable. She barely looked up as she handed me the key to room 6. The key was heavy, an old brass relic from another time, and it seemed to hum faintly in my hand. "Room 6, she said in a voice that was devoid of warmth or welcome. Zach and I exchanged uneasy glances, but we were too tired to protest. The snowstorm outside was getting worse, and there was no other place to go. We trudged up the icy stairs to our room, dragging our luggage behind us. The room was small, not much bigger than a closet, with 2 twin beds shoved into opposite corners. The heater sputtered weakly in the corner, making a sound like it was about to give up any minute. The faint smell of mildew filled the room, mingling with the stale scent of something old, something that felt like it had been there long before we ever arrived. We both collapsed into bed. The warmth from the heater was a small comfort, but it wasn't enough to rid the room of its heaviness. The night dragged on in a suffocating silence. I kept hearing strange noises, soft tapping, like something scratching against the walls, but each time I turned to ask Zach if he heard it too, he was fast asleep, unaware or indifferent. I stared at the ceiling, where a large brown stain marred the paint, a sickly blotch that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I tried to laugh it off. "Just don't look too hard at it," Zach muttered as he turned over, trying to fall asleep. But the stain wouldn't leave my mind. Something about it made me feel like we were being watched, trapped in a place that had already swallowed others whole. I pulled the blanket over my head, wishing for the night to end, wishing that the storm would take us somewhere else, anywhere else. I woke up to the sound of whispers. At first, I thought it was Zach, but when I turned to look, he was still fast asleep, his breathing steady. The whispers were faint, almost inaudible, but they seemed to swirl around the room, as though the very air was speaking. I strained to listen, but all I could make out were soft, unintelligible murmurs, words I couldn't understand, coming from nowhere. I tried to shake it off, turning over and pulling the covers tightly around me. But sleep didn't come easily. The longer I lay there, the more the whispers seemed to grow, echoing in the corners of the room. I finally drifted off again, but when I woke up, it wasn't as simple as just opening my eyes. My heart stopped. There I was, in the other bed. I blinked. It didn't make sense. I had been in my own bed just moments ago, but now, I was lying in the other one. My body felt heavy, and panic began to crawl up my spine. I turned to look at Zach. There he was, asleep in his bed, undisturbed. But I could feel the weight of the room shift, as though the space was no longer ours. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My mouth moved, but my voice was trapped inside, suffocated by the oppressive air that filled the room. My pulse raced as my mind spiraled into chaos. What was happening? Was I dreaming? I blinked again, and suddenly, I was back in my own bed. The room was silent again, and Zach was still asleep, unaware of the nightmare I had just experienced. I gasped for air, my chest tight. The feeling of being watched was still there, though, and the strange weight of the room hadn't left. "Zach," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Did you hear that?" Zach stirred, groggily opening his eyes. "What?" "No, just a weird dream, man," he muttered, dismissing it. But we didn't laugh. Neither of us did. The next morning, we tried to laugh it off. Just a weird dream, I told myself, but the feeling that something was wrong never quite left. It wasn't the room itself, it was something else, something that had come with us. We packed up quickly, eager to leave, but as we stepped out into the cold morning light, the world felt different. The snowstorm had passed, but the chill in the air seemed to seep into my very bones. The world outside felt wrong. As we drove away, the landscape blurred past us, but it wasn't just the weather that felt off, it was us. The air in the car was thick, oppressive, as though something was sitting just behind us, watching us. The unease followed us. It didn't stay at the motel, it came with us. Every mile we traveled, I felt like we were being followed, like some invisible force was trailing us. The car felt smaller, tighter, and the silence between Zach and I grew uncomfortable. We couldn't explain it. Neither of us could. But I knew what I felt, and I wasn't the only one. Zach's usual confidence had vanished. His eyes kept darting nervously to the rearview mirror, as though expecting to see something in the distance, something waiting. And then, something happened. Zach stopped talking altogether. He didn't respond to me when I spoke, his eyes hollow and distant. It was as though he wasn't there anymore. I felt a cold dread settle over me. A few days later, we checked into a Holiday Inn, hoping that the change of scenery would rid us of the unsettling feeling. The room was modern, clean, the kind of place that should have felt comforting, but the air in it was just as heavy as in the motel. The same feeling lingered, thick and suffocating. Zach, pale and distant, refused to leave his room. I received the call from his mom the next morning. She was frantic. Zach hadn't left his room in days. I rushed over, my heart pounding with dread. The moment I stepped inside, I felt it, the same cold, stale air that had clung to the motel room. Zach lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, his body stiff, his eyes fixed in a vacant, haunted gaze. He didn't react to my presence at first. "It's happening again," he whispered. The words chilled me to the core. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to go back to the place where it all started, to confront whatever had followed us. I checked into a motel just outside town, a small, outdated place that looked eerily similar to the one we stayed at in Utah. As I stepped into the room, the mirror caught my eye. There, reflected in the glass, was Zach sitting on the bed, staring back at me with those same hollow, vacant eyes. But when I turned around, the room was empty. There was no one there. A cold shiver ran down my spine. The feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and I felt the weight of something pressing in on me, like the room itself was alive. The next morning, I left without a word. But the sense of dread remained, following me, clinging to me like a second skin. It wasn't just in the motels anymore, it was in my life now. I don't know if I'll ever escape it. Every night, I hear the whispers again, faint and far off, as if they're still waiting. Watching. And I know, deep down, that whatever happened in room 6 hasn't finished with us yet. It's only just begun.